right. Well, we're going to kick off. Thiago and I put together this slide presentation, so I think we'll probably take questions at the end. But remote pair programming, we're going to get into when to do it, when not to do it, and some practical tips. But first, let's start with why.
All right, so I'm pretty sure the first question that comes to mind when we talk about pair programming, remote pair programming, is why? Why should I pair? Why should two engineers share the same machine and work on the same problem for hours or sometimes for multiple days? So here are a few reasons. Here are a few of the benefits. So number one, at least a few that I want to highlight, is pairing brings what's called the hyperfocus or monotasking. So pairing keeps you and your pair super engaged, as you will not have access to Slack, email, or any distracting website while you have someone watching your screen or right there counting on you for help. Number two, pairing also is what's called as a continuous rubber ducking. So what I mean by that is you have someone there to talk to you, to unblock you, to catch your mistakes, or to give feedback on your code right away, all the time. Number three, pairing is also a fantastic way to onboard new team members, working on real problems and answering their questions and explaining the architectural details of the code base as needed, instead of like asking someone to read the docs of the doc that might sometimes be out of date and to only find out that things were wrong like days after. And number four, pairing is also a risk mitigation strategy. So pairing helps to decrease what's known as the buzz factor. That basically comes to the following question. How many people could be hit by a bus without any impact to your project or to your team? So here are a few.
So when, let's get into when to pair. The most obvious reason to pair program is when you're stuck.
Thiago, I'm sorry to jump in, and I'm just jumping in because I'm having fun. But Thiago, we also failed to mention when Mike Montero or Patrick Franklin misses a semicolon in their 4,000 line program or function. Sorry, got to have poor pair programming to find that missing semicolon.
100%.
So there you go. You have to solve a problem. It helps to bring in, definitely helps to bring in a second mind to get unstuck on that problem. Number two is it's fine to start a Slack chat about a programming question, but if that chat goes back and forth, especially in real time, that's just not efficient. Make that an internal trigger that it's time to look at the same screen and talk about it. But let's get into some less obvious reasons. One is to save time when you're making design decisions. The thing is, as developers, we're almost always making design decisions. Sometimes these are big decisions around architecture. Sometimes they're small decisions like just how do you name something. This gets into number four. Programming reduces delivery time of that one item. Of course, you can have two people working on two things in parallel, but working together on the same problem makes solving that one problem go faster. And finally, pairing is a chance to learn skills from your partner. This isn't about junior programmer versus senior programmer. Pairing is a chance for old dogs to learn new tricks and for you new dogs to learn some old tricks.
Nice. Now let's get into when not to pair, when pairing is not a good idea. So the first, let's say, time that pairing might not be a really good idea is whenever you're not making a lot of decisions, or whenever the amount of decisions you're making is really small. Like for example, whenever you're just following instructions, whenever you're just, let's say, repeating a task that both parts already know, like, I don't know, replicating existing pattern on the code base, or just kind of like running a script or something like that. The second reason is whenever you need to study, or whenever like neither parts of the pair are familiar with a framework or with, let's say, with the concept, and you need to do research. So it's not a good idea, I would say, to have, let's say, two people reading at the same time and to try to kind of like find out how something work together. So whenever you're researching or exploring multiple like sources, pairing is not a good idea.
All right, what you really came for is practical tips, so let's get into that. Tip number one is to use a style called navigator. In pairing, it's helpful to adopt different roles. And like two people on a road trip, you have one driver and one navigator, where the driver is doing the typing and can focus on the small details. The navigator keeps an eye on the landscape and can focus on the big picture, or maybe shout out, look out for that thing. This combines two styles of thinking. The driver can do tactical thinking, while the navigator can focus more on strategic thinking.
That's what Patrick was saying about the semicolon. That's the navigator right there. Tip number two, so use the microphone close to your mouth, but not too close. Sorry about that. So avoid the computer microphone or the speakerphone at all costs. The room echo or any background noise will be captured and make super hard to understand you, or super annoying to the listener. So another tip here is to avoid wireless mics like the new Apple AirPods, because they're probably okay for a half an hour, 1 hour meeting when you're not speaking that much, but they don't sound great, and they capture a lot of background noise, and also they run out of battery really quickly, especially if you're pairing for hours. In short, you definitely need a good headset and a good mic for remote pairing. Remote pairing in particular is all about the good audio quality. Respect the listener.
Tip number three, cameras on, parenthesis. So when you can, and general rule, it's helpful to turn your cameras on because video gives us richer communication with more context. You can see emotional communication like facial expressions. You can see some context about the other person's life. It helps to create a more human connection. But that said, sometimes video just gets laggy, so you can agree to turn it off.
Awesome. Tip number four, breaks. Plan for them. So pairing and remote pairing in particular is really exhausting. So make sure to do regular breaks, or otherwise you'll be dying after a couple of hours of pairing. And remember, pairing is all about having a good experience. So it needs to be something that both parts are enjoying and are looking forward to it and are able to keep doing for as long as needs, right? So regular breaks make the pairing experience a lot less exhausting and a lot more productive and fun.
And tip five, switch roles, mix it up fairly often, where it's helpful to switch who's driving regularly. I'd say at least once every half hour, and maybe even once every 10 minutes, just get into this rhythm. But to avoid the lag that comes with remote keyboarding, it's not hard. You just switch work from one computer to the other, and you can do this easily by using a shared branch. In this image, Thiago can commit and push. Don't think about the commit message. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can just be WIP, work in progress. Push, then I pull, and then I become the driver and share my screen, so there's no lag.
Awesome. The last one we have is about screen size. So more often than not, you'll be pairing with someone that has a completely different display or a completely different screen size than yours. So as a rule of thumb, I always use the smallest resolution of the two as a baseline. And remember, remote pairing is all about good audio, good video, and good screen sharing experience. So not only good for one side, but for both sides. So kind of making sure that both parts having a good resolution, able to read well, are able to listen and to speak, and have a kind of good video is essential here. So before we close, here are a couple of tools that Amex has that are available that allow you to do pair programming. So the first one is the one that you're using, is WebEx. It's probably not the best tool out there for pair programming, for remote pair programming, because it does not easily enable you to to kind of like quickly take over the keyboard or to point out things on screen, even though it's possible, it gets the job done and is really stable. The second one that not everybody is aware of is InVision. So InVision has a tool called InVision Freehand that is inside there, and it is a fantastic tool to create whiteboards where multiple people can collaborate and like change things at the same time. It is also a really good resource for like having that small breakdown of the user story you're working before you start to actually do coding.
We all have Slack now, so you can hit the telephone icon to make a Slack call. And during screen sharing, the navigator can circle things on the driver screen, which makes communication that much easier. But it can get laggy. So we're piloting a tool called Tuple, which was designed for remote pairing, and it supports remote keyboarding. But remember, whatever you use, make sure to only use tools that have been vetted by our security team.
Perfect. And here are a few references that we want to leave regarding pairing and remote pairing. So those are the two articles that we strongly recommend. The first one answers pretty much all the questions you have about pair programming, and the second one answers one of the most asked questions, that is, what does an effective navigator should do? And two books that we really like and have a lot of content about pairing. And lastly, we just want to leave here, if you want to see all the links that we use for this presentation and want to discuss more about pair programming or remote pair programming, please join the pair programming channel on Slack. That's it. Thank you, folks.
All right, any questions?
Yeah, it looks like there's a question. Can we unmute?
Yep, Swagat, your mute is open.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Awesome. Yeah, so I was curious, a lot of teams here are working in PIs. So in that respect, you're planning out a lot of the things that you're trying to ship out. And when you pair program, you're essentially putting two developers on one task. How do you navigate feature delivery along with the need to pair program to remove blockers or continue to innovate?
So, I mean, I can answer from my side and let Jon also add on that. I would say that pairing actually makes easier because, I mean, what we are trying to optimize, at least that's on the mobile team, we're trying to optimize how fast we move a story from, let's say, ready for dev to ready for QA, right? So if you have, let's say, two engineers working on two separate stories at the same time, those two stories usually take a lot longer than when you have like a pair of engineers working on the same item. So, but not everybody and not every story deserves pairing. Right? There's some stories that are really easy or don't deserve the same kind of attention because there might be things they already know how to do, like is already kind of like super easy. But there is no special, let's say, planning like changes, at least for us, for enable pairing.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that.
Thank you.
That answers, yeah.
I think I'm looking at the time and there's a bunch of questions coming through, but I think we had, there were a couple of questions on the Q&A. And just really simply, what are the tools, like what pair programming tool do we have available? And is there this is obviously distributed centric, but is there a version for mainframe as well? Another question that came through.
So slide 22, I mean, we just talked about WebEx, Slack, and Tuple they were piloting. But yeah, if you want to know more, you can definitely join the pair programming Slack channel. We can give you more ideas and more tools. But I would say there is nothing special about mainframe or mobile about pairing. I mean, if you have like a software you can share a screen, you should be able to do it.
Come on over to the channel and we can get into more details there.
Yeah, we have a question from Sean Aronas. Your mic is open, Sean.
Hi. So, thank you for taking my question. So, I'm wondering, as someone who paired full time in the XP environment at Allstate and witnessed firsthand the boredom that people experience when they're not actually driving. How do you know when you're doing the right amount of it? I know you kind of created some guideposts and it makes sense, but at what point, do you say, well, this isn't so beneficial?
I think one thing I want to point out is that pairing is a skill like anything else. And so you can do it badly. Just because you're doing it doesn't mean it's great. So it's something that we need to grow in and learn to do better, and share tips on how to do that. That's a non-answer, vague meta non-answer.
To add on top of what you said, John, I would say that being a driver and being a navigator is completely different. I would say that the navigator part of being a good at pair programming is usually the one that I see folks having more trouble with because they don't know what to do if they're not typing. So I think there's a lot to do, and we shared like 2 blog posts that talk a lot about it. Is what is the role of the navigator? And driving doesn't mean live coding. You don't need to be kind of like non-stop typing. You need to be back and forth and kind of like make sure that we're both at the same page. I think the worst thing that can happen is the driver is just going like far away and like the navigator is completely lost just watching. That's not what pairing is.
All right, guys.